Hello, Politified, and welcome to our very exclusive Walter Block interview. We are excited and honored to have Walter Block here today to answer some questions about libertarianism and Austrian economics in general. And it's great to have someone as knowledgeable as him. So, without further ado, here we are. This is Walter Block. We got Benjamin Politics, top left. So I'm gonna turn on audio, and of course we will have stream questions. We will have the usual as we have with other interviews and other debates. I'm excited to see the chat as active as it is. So Walter Block, how are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. Happy to be with you.
Well, it's a great thing to have someone as knowledgeable as you on economics to be with us, and it's a great learning experience not only for the viewers but for us. Benjamin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
And we also have our guest Mencius Kang, I should say, here. He organized this event and got Walter Block here, so thank you, Mencius.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. So just to start off a bit of the question period for us, we want to know, first of all, you went to high school with Bernie Sanders,
I
as
did.
we understand.
Yes.
What do you think? Do you think you could have convinced him out of his socialist ways at any time in his youth?
Well, first I have to tell you my Bernie Sanders joke. Bernie Sanders and I were both on the same track team, the Madison High School track team. He was one of the best runners in the whole city. I was a mediocre runner. And Bernie never ran away from anything. He never ran away from socialism. He was very courageous. He never ran away from not only ex-cons voting, but even convicts voting, people in jail voting. But there's one person from whom he ran away, and that's me, because we started off at the same starting line, and then he just ran away from me because he would, his mile pace would be around 4:30, and I never broke 5 minutes for the mile. So that's my big joke. It's not very funny, but I'm doing the best I can. When I was in high school, I was mainly interested in sports and girls. He was interested in sports and girls too, but he was very political. I agreed with everything he thought about. I mean, I'm Jewish. We're in Brooklyn. It's sort of in the air. You're a socialist. Otherwise, you're crazy. So I had the same views as him, but I was never political. I was never really interested in it that much. My interest came much later. So I don't know if I could have converted him then. I don't think I can convert him now. Every 5 years or so, or every 10 years, we exchange an email or two. And I tell you, after COVID is over, I intend to invite him to speak at Loyola University because I like to have my students hear both sides. And I've had Ron Paul, and I'm going to ask Rand Paul. And why not ask Bernie? And I'll tell that stupid joke when I introduce him. So I doubt that I could convince him now. If when we were kids, if I knew then what I know now, maybe I'd have a shot because he would probably be more impressionable at age, 16, 17, whatever. We also overlapped for 1 year at Brooklyn College, and then he went off to the University of Chicago, and I stayed at Brooklyn College and graduated from there. So we do have a background, and he never yelled much. He was very sweet, very nice. He was the leader type then. He was like the captain of the track team, and not just because he was one of the best runners, but because he had charisma then, and he certainly has it. As you can see, you don't get to be a senator and a possible presidential, a possible president. Forget about presidential candidate, unless you have some sort of charisma. And he was very popular and a nice guy. And we also lived in about the same quadrant away from Madison High School. So we'd sometimes walk to school or walk from school together, and we met at Brooklyn College as well. So he was, one of the maybe 100 or 200 acquaintances I had. We were never really bosom buddies or friends, but, we certainly, he knows exactly who I am. Oh, wait a second, I have to show you something. Here's my high school yearbook.
Oh.
We both graduated in 1959. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
And I have a picture of the track team. Here's a picture of the track team. And Bernie is sort of in the back. Let's see if we can get closer. He's one of the people in the back, and I'm in the middle because I was sort of middle-sized, and we were placed in size order. And then I have to show you what I looked like when I was in high school. I had hair then. You can see that I'm right under my finger. Can you see me there?
Yes,
Yep.
sir.
That's me.
Wow, very attractive, very good-looking guy.
Yes, good guy. And now here's a picture of Bernie. Where is Bernie? Here's Bernie. He's got all the writing on him.
Oh, right there. Yeah.
See him there?
Yeah.
Looks just like him.
And it's so interesting to see two figures like this come out of like the same school, like growing up together.
Environment. It's very similar environment too.
Well, Madison High School, we also had Rose Bader Ginsburg, and we also had Chuck Schumer and Gary Becker, my dissertation advisor, Nobel Prize winner. So Madison High School had a lot of powerful people.
Yeah, actually, going on in your youth in politics, what were you ever a lefty at any point? Did you ever start out as like a socialist or a communist or something like that?
Yes. When I was in high school, I was a lefty, and when I was in college, I was a lefty. And then all of a sudden, Ayn Rand came to Brooklyn College to speak, and I came to boo and hiss her because she favored free enterprise. And everyone knows, free enterprise leads to starvation and, misery. And we're all against capitalism and free enterprise. It's evil. And at the end of the gathering, they announced that there was a lunch in her honor, and anyone could come, even if you didn't agree. And I wanted to convert her to socialism. And there was this big long table of about maybe 50 people on a side, and she was sitting at the head, and her little group of people, Alan Greenspan and Nathaniel Brandon, Leonard Peikoff was sitting at one end, and I was relegated to the other end of the table. And I turned to my neighbor and said, "What's this? Capitalism is evil. Socialism is the way to go." And he said, "Well, I don't really know that much about it, but the people who do are at the other end of the table." So I stuck my head in between Ein's and Nathaniel's, and I said, "There's a socialist here who wants to debate someone on socialism and capitalism." He said, "Who is it?" I said, "Me." And I was, maybe 20 years old, roughly the age of you guys, and Brandon maybe 35 and Rand 50 or so. And Brandon was very nice, very gentle. He said, "Look, there's no room at this end of the table, but I'll come to your end of the table and we'll talk on two conditions. One, you promise to keep this discussion going until we settle it. Don't just end it at one time. And two, you have to read two books that I'll recommend." The two books were Atlas Shrugged and Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. I read those books, and I went to his and her house in Manhattan. I was in Brooklyn at the time. Maybe 5 or 6 times, and I was converted. I was a free enterpriser of the Henry Hazlitt type. I mean, I wasn't an anarcho-capitalist yet. That came later when I met Murray Rothbard, but I was a free enterpriser, and I never really went for the rest of the Randian stuff about epistemology and metaphysics and aesthetics and all that. But the economics I really liked. But I didn't like the cult aspect of it because, if you ask Ayn Rand a question, well, on page 426, you say this, could you elaborate? Well, that's a friendly question, and she would answer it. But if you say on page 426, you said this, but on page 700, you said that, and there's a contradiction, she would kick you out. She would say, "Get out." That's not the right way to treat people. That's not the way Brandon and Rand treated me when I was learning at their knee or at their feet or whatever you want to call it. But it was sort of cultish, but those were the only people I knew. So I was sort of schizophrenic. I'd come there and then I'd leave because it was cultish, and then they were the only people I know. So I'd come back and forth, and then finally I met Murray Rothbard, and I associated with him, and he converted me to anarcho-capitalism in about 10 minutes using the Henry Hazlitt idea that, well, you see why we should privatize the post office. Well, why shouldn't we privatize police? And all of a sudden, the light bulb went on top of my head, and that was about it. It took me quite a while to get into Austrian economics, but that was a much slower process. But I finally got there.
Yeah. So when did you meet Rothbard, actually?
I met Rothbard maybe in 1966. What happened was Larry Moss was a fellow student of mine at Columbia. We were both getting a PhD in in economics. And Larry said, "You must meet Murray Rothbard. He's an anarchist." I said, "An anarchist? That's crazy. I don't want to meet an anarchist." So I said, "No, I'm not. I don't want to meet Murray Rothbard. How would Murray Rothbard?" And then he and his roommate, Jerry Wallows, ganged up on me, and they finally prevailed upon me to meet Murray Rothbard. And boy, oh boy, as I say, in about 10 minutes, he got me into anarcho-capitalism. And then I was, one of Murray's living room people, one of his followers, one of his friends. He was my mentor, my friend. He changed my life. Pretty much everything I do is sort of dedicated to him. The way I see it, he passed on the baton of liberty and good economics to me, and I'm trying to pass it on to people your age and my students at Loyola. So that's sort of the background of how I came to be where I am.
Well, Dan, that's wonderful. What do you think is the best Rothbard book, or books if you want to have multiple, I guess?
That's a horrible, nasty question. I have two children, and you say, "Well, which child do you love more?" Which parent do you guys love more? You don't want to answer a question like that. I would say in Austrian economics, it would be Man, Economy, and State. And in libertarianism, it'd be For New Liberty and the Ethics of Liberty. Those would be the three books that jump out at me. But I mean, Murray was very, very productive. He must have written, I don't know, a zillion words and many small articles. Like, what has government done to our money? And, just on and on and on. The history books. Murray was very, very productive and wrote in many, many areas, not just economics and philosophy, but I don't know. He also wrote about movies. He was the cultural critic of the Libertarian Forum, for example.
Yeah. So Rothbard is very prolific. You are also very prolific. You've written quite a bit of articles. You have, as I understand it, you have a lot of articles with Milton Friedman. Do you think Milton Friedman, or do you still consider him a Rhodes socialist?
Well, one of my books is Why We Should Privatize the Highways.
Yeah.
And let me see if I can find that. I have to flash my books at you. Where is it? I can't find that stupid book. Here it is. Great. The Privatization of the Roads and Highways. Mm-hmm. The reason I wrote this book is 40. You know how many people die on the roads every year? Something like 35 to 40,000 people die on the roads. And nobody says boo about that. I mean, how many people died in 9/11? Just a stinking lousy 3,000. How many people died in Katrina around New Orleans? Just 1,900 people. Now, every life is precious, and 1,900 and 3,000 lives are precious. I'm not trying to diminish that, but I'm trying to put it in context. And every year, something like 38,000 people die on the highways, and nobody says boo about it. Whereas, how many people has COVID killed? Well, COVID has killed people too, and everyone's concerned about that, but nobody's concerned about deaths on the highways. Now, the usual reason people give why people die on the highways is what I call proximate causes: speeding, drunk driving, vehicle malfunction, driver error, inattention, texting, whatever. But those are just proximate causes. It's sort of like, why did the restaurant go broke? And this is pre-COVID. Why did the pre-COVID restaurant go broke? And people start listing, well, the food was lousy, the location was no good, the place was dirty, the service was crappy. No. The ultimate reason is because the management located the restaurant in the wrong place and didn't buy good food. Look, I'm now going to take a gun and I'm going to go shoot the person out the window. And you guys capture me and say I'm a murderer. I said, no, I'm not a murderer. The bullet did it.
Yeah.
Well, the bullet did do it, but the bullet was the proximate cause, but I was the ultimate cause. Just like the restaurant manager is the ultimate cause, and the bad waitress is the proximate cause. Well, it's the same thing in roads. It's not speeding and vehicle malfunction and driver error and stuff like that. It's the fact that the manager of the road doesn't manage better to reduce that. Now, I don't think it'll be reduced down to zero, but I think it would be reduced greatly. For example, right now the speed limit is on the highway, the I-10. Where are you guys located? What cities?
I'm in Washington State.
Yeah,
Okay.
California, so that's pretty bad.
Okay, so Highway 5.
Yeah.
Highway 5 is the north-south highway. Highway 10 is the east-west highway that goes through New Orleans. Well, the minimum speed is 40 and the maximum speed is 70. And if you go 70, what experience do you have? People go right by you. Most people do 75, 78, 85, whatever. So what I'm saying is maybe it's not speed. Maybe it's the variation in speed. Maybe it's the fact that people do 70 in the left lane and everybody has to go around them to get past them to do 75. Maybe it would be better if on the highway, the right lane was everyone had to do 65, the middle lane, everyone had to do 75, and the left lane, everyone had to do 85. Would that do better? Would that reduce deaths? We don't know. Why don't we know? Because you can't have experiments. It's one rules of the road made in Washington for everybody. Look, the reason we have pretty good pens and pretty good shirts and pretty good eyeglasses is because we have competition. Well, we have no competition. So if we had private roads, one person would have 65, 75, and 85. Another person would have 60, 70, and 80. And another person would have different rules of the road in speed. And maybe that would reduce deaths. Not maybe, absolutely. Namely, what I'm trying to do is apply what we know about why we have good shoes and good rubber bands to highways. And say competition is the key. So let's privatize the roads, and now we'll see great improvements.
It's so interesting how if a government program fails, or like if roads fail, there's just more tax increased on the citizens, and if a privatized organization fails that, then they it's detrimental towards them, and they pay the price of the market.
That's right. We have bankruptcy. The reason we have pretty good cars and pretty good shoes and pretty good rubber bands is if you don't make a good shoe or a rubber band or a car, you're going to lose money. And if you keep not doing a good job, you're going to go bankrupt. Where is Packard? Where is, other companies that have gone broke? Who's the one that made cameras?
I'm not entirely sure.
I forget who made cameras. Well, we don't need cameras anymore. We got these things, right? And who made typewriters? Rand made typewriters. Not Ayn Rand, but the Rand company made typewriters. Well, they didn't keep up. They didn't innovate, and they went broke. And happily so. So now we have computers instead.
Do you have any favorite Murray Rothbard memories that kind of resonate?
Yes, my favorite Murray Rothbard memory is stomach cramps. Why stomach cramps? Because Murray was very funny, not like me. I tell jokes, but they're pathetic jokes. Murray told great jokes, and he'd keep us laughing for hour after hour. And you sit in his living room and laugh for 5 hours, and you get stomach cramps. That's, even Bill Buckley, who was no friend of Murray's, who was very critical of him, referred to Murray and his merry band. And that was true. It was so much fun to be with Murray. Yes, it was educational as well, but it was just so much fun to be with him. And that's what jumps out at me. And, we would play Risk, the game Risk, where you attack other countries. And Murray said, only anarcho-capitalists can play the game without feeling guilty, because we really don't want to take over the world, whereas everyone else does. So, little gems like that. Murray used to like jazz music. I'm more into Baroque music, but I would sometimes go with him to bars where they would play jazz. He also stayed up all night. He would go to sleep at around 4 in.the.morning, maybe 5 in.the.morning, and get up at, 2 in.the.afternoon. Ruined my, I was in school at the time. I had classes, and I wanted to go home at around 2. He says, no, stay. And it's hard to leave Murray, even though you got to get up early and go to class. It was just a blast knowing Murray. the Reader's Digest used to have this thing, the most memorable character I've ever met, Murray was mine.
Back on the
you
whole
spoke
roads
about Bill
thing.
Buckley and
Wait, sorry, am I muted?
let me just
Oh,
I think you were, but let me just go. Let me ask a question real quick. You spoke about Bill Buckley, and what you were there, of course, when Rothbard died. You were there for the reaction. What did you think about his obituary, which is often seen as a very negative obituary to Murray Rothbard?
Oh, he was very critical, and rightly so from his point of view.
Sure.
Because Murray was undermining what he was trying to build up. What he was trying to build up was neoconism or militarism. And look, on economics, the conservatives are not all bad. Yeah. But on personal liberties, they're horrible. And on foreign policy, they're even worse. Mm-hmm. So Bill Buckley was quite right in the sense of seeing Murray as an enemy. I mean, he could have been a more gentle. The guy just died, be nice. Yeah. Don't speak ill of the dead or whatever. But in terms of, from his point of view, I think he was absolutely correct that Murray was an enemy and Murray was undermining him and Murray was taking young people away from him because, Murray wasn't as charismatic as Bill Buckley and Bill Buckley was more presentable. Murray was this little fat guy who kept giggling. Whereas Buckley was, more macho or something. I don't know. So, but Murray was intellectually and morally in the big leagues, and Bill Buckley was not.
Mm-hmm. Bean, you can go on with what you were going to say, by the way.
Oh yeah, I was talking about the whole roads thing. A couple of weeks ago, I got in a car accident on a highway, and since then I've been telling everyone, if the roads were private, that wouldn't have happened.
Well, don't say it wouldn't have happened. Just say it less likely to happen, because unless you have a 5-mile-an-hour speed limit, and on my road, if I had a private road and I wanted to reduce deaths to 0, I would have a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit, but then no one would come on my road because people don't want to go 15 miles an hour. My estimate was instead of say 35,000 people a year dying, I estimated 10,000 people a year would die.
Yeah, I mostly say it as a joke because, I like to tell people to read your book on highways and stuff. So I'm like, I don't think it would have changed anything, honestly. But still, I'm like, yeah, just privatize the roads and then you won't have all these deer running out in front of the cars because they'll be fined if they do that.
Well, the deer won't be fined, but there might be a fence put up so that they can't come. Another one would be if there are deaths there, you put a big cross or a big Jewish star. And I'm not talking about 5 feet, I'm talking about 50 feet. And maybe a whole bunch of them, which will get people scared. And the first half of the book goes through all sorts of ways in which they could compete and make things better. And then the second half of the book goes over all the, objections to privatizing the road. But my motto is, if it moves, privatize. If it doesn't move, privatize it. And since everything either moves or doesn't move, you privatize everything. Another of my books is why we should privatize oceans, rivers, and lakes. Another one is why we should privatize the space race and the moon and Mars when we get there. So privatization is a key element of libertarianism and good economics, because the opposite of privatization is either non-ownership, in which case you get the tragedy of the commons, or government ownership, in which case you get the problems of central planning. So privatization is the way to go, and for everything, anything and everything.
A little while back, I talked to a socialist about privatizing water, and I talked about how places like Norway and other countries practiced it and it worked well in preserving fish. And then he would bring up well, what about the tragedy of the commons? And I'm just like, I don't think you know what that means, because that's not what happens with privatization. That's literally the opposite.
We're solving it through
this. And that's just, I didn't really get that. Why do you keep bringing up the tragedy of the commons? That has nothing to do with my points. And I was presenting actual studies on it, showing how effective it was. And I talked about the ethics of it. I'm like, this is a good thing, but tragedy of the commons, where does that come into play?
Well, no, it is relevant, but as you say quite correctly, it's the very opposite. Namely, you're trying to mitigate the tragedy of the commons by privatizing. He really should, get a brain, or I don't know, go to school or something. My favorite example of that is the cow and the buffalo. Why is it that the buffalo almost went extinct and the cow never came within 1 million miles of extinction? Well, one was privatized and the other was under the tragedy of the commons.
Mm-hmm.
If you kill your cow, you don't have a cow tomorrow. Whereas if you kill a buffalo, you're not going to have the buffalo anyway, so you might as well kill it. And you'll kill it indiscriminately. And that's why they almost, and the same thing for the elephant and the rhino. And you get a lot of these left-wing environmentalists who say, "Oh no, you have to save the whale or save the elephant," and they don't realize that if you privatize it, you get rid of the tragedy of the commons. But right now, that's exactly what you have.
So, Professor Blanc, what areas do you think that or Walter Block, whatever you'd like to be called, what areas do you think that Austrian economics can be expanded on? Is there anything that you would like to see more writing on that you don't think has been written on enough?
Well, the problem is we don't have as many Austrian economists as I'd like. If we had more, we'd cover more areas. But I think, I have no problem. I don't think that, Austrian well, they say that Austrian economists should be focusing on maybe the business cycle because we are unique in the business cycle, and not that many people, Roger Garrison, Bill Barnett, a few other, Joe Salerno does stuff on that, interest rates and stuff like that. But I think, Austrian economists would be just the same as mainstream economists, that they should do whatever they damn well please, whatever's the most fun. I was once talking to one of my co-authors, and we had 4 or 5 papers going, and he said, "Well, which one should I work on now?" And I said, "Whichever one is the most fun, because we're supposed to have fun, and you should enjoy your career." Now, if an editor is breathing down your neck with a deadline, okay, well then you have to put that at the front of the pack. But otherwise, I wouldn't say, I'm not a central planner for Austrian economists. I'm not saying, well, look, you Austrians, you should stop working on this so much and start working on that. You should do whatever you want. And, we have several journals, the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics, the Review of Austrian Economics. And then there are many other journals that will accept Austrian stuff nowadays, whereas in the past, maybe not so much. So Austrianism is making, I won't say a comeback, but for the number of people we have more than a proportionate share of the attention and of the good work.
Who is your, aside from yourself, who do you think is your favorite Austrian libertarian theorist?
Well, Hans Hoppe certainly would be one who comes to my mind. I think Hans is brilliant. I think Hans has done magnificent work in Austrian economics and magnificent stuff in libertarian theory. So he's certainly a person I would think of in that regard. Guido Holzmann is another one. Most of the people associated with the Mises Institute, Tom Garrison, Joe Salerno, Lou Rockwell, Tom Woods. I shouldn't talk this way because I'm leaving out some people: Jeff Herbener, David Gordon, Bob Murphy. I'm going to kick myself because I'm forgetting somebody, but I'm a big fan of the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. And pretty much all of the people that are associated with that, Andrew Napolitano, well, he's not an economist, but he is a great libertarian theorist. Yeah. Those would be some of the people that I would say are excellent.
You might have Gene Epstein with a very angry email to you after this, because you didn't include him or something like that.
Well, but, there's also Richard Epstein, Gene Epstein. I mean, the list goes on and on. There are a lot of very, very good, talented people.
Yeah.
I would mention, not only the Mises Institute, but, Cato Institute and the Reason Foundation, and there are CEI and Bob Sirico doing stuff on economics and religion. And then there's a PERC in what do you call it? Montana, does good stuff on environmental economics. The Austro-libertarian movement is all over the place. And, then you have the, what do they call that thing in New Hampshire? The Free State Project.
Yes, yeah.
Which is a great idea to, gather libertarians to a less populous state. So there are a lot of think tanks. I mean, the Pelican Institute in Louisiana is the Free Market Institute in Louisiana, but every state And I think there are 50 states that have at least one think tank that focuses mainly on the state issues, the local issues, and they do excellent work as well.
Topic of a possible like liberty state, right? And I have a couple things. In Eastern Washington, there's a proposed idea of having a liberty state in the less populated Eastern Washington, because as you know, the major cities in Washington are all in the western part. I mean, Olympia, Seattle, Tacoma, Bellevue. There's a proposed liberty state that is absolutely constitutional, and in a survey, 73% of a group of over 8,000 participants approved of creating this state. How would you feel this would run if it actually came to be?
Well, I would certainly favor it, and not only Washington, but Oregon is the same thing. California is the same thing. I mean, the coast of Oregon, Washington, and California are all lefty, pinko, socialist, whatever. But the middle and the eastern part of those states are all much more free enterprise. I think it would be great if they broke away and seceded. Look, if Biden gets in, they might make Puerto Rico a state and Washington, D.C. a state. Well, in order to counter that, we could have 3 new states: Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon, and Eastern California, or Middle California, whatever you call them. So I would certainly favor that, and I don't see any reason why we shouldn't have that. Now, this sort of brings up the issue of federalism versus, what do you call it, centralism versus decentralism. And a lot of libertarians, I think, make the mistake of saying, well, we should favor decentralism. And I think that should be the usual view of libertarians. If you don't know anything else, favor the city over the state, favor the state over the federal government. But sometimes we know more things. Like Ronald Reagan was threatening New York City that if you don't get rid of rent control, we're going to kick your butt. We're going to, stop giving you subsidies or something. Well, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Because rent control is a bad thing, and here the federal government was better than the state government. Or the city government. In many other cases, it's the opposite. On the minimum wage, the federal government is better than most states. Federal government has a $7.25, and many states have 10 or 12 or 15. So I would be a federalist on the issue where the federal government is closer to libertarianism, and I'd be a decentralist or an anti-federalist on areas where the local people were better. Look, Oregon, bless them, bless those lefties in Portland and Eugene, legalized heroin and cocaine. Mm-hmm. And, the righties are all apoplectic about that. I mean, Rush Limbaugh is not a fan of that, but, the conservatives are not that good on personal liberties. So we have to applaud the lefties in Oregon, who we were just attacking a minute ago. Right, for being a bunch of pinkos, but they're pretty good on that issue.
Speaking of lefties and conservatives, what's your main reaction to the election? Did it go the way you thought it would? Is there any comments you have on it?
Well, I was bad. In 2016, me and a bunch of people started 2 groups. One was Libertarians for Trump, and the other was Scholars for Trump. Why Scholars for Trump? Because everyone said only rednecks in flyover country would vote for him. So we got about 150 people signing up, and you had to have a PhD. And then I got about 5,000 people signing up for Libertarians for Trump. And the idea was that if you're in a blue state like, and I'm not sure why blue is left and red is right. You think red would be closer to communism and should be the opposite way. But the vernacular is, in California, Donald was running against Hillary, and Hillary was going to kick his butt, and libertarians then should vote for Gary Johnson, the libertarian voter. And then in, say, Texas or Louisiana, Donald is going to win easily. And then again, Donald doesn't need our vote, so vote for Gary Johnson. But in Pennsylvania or states that are purple, well, now we have to forget about libertarianism, or the LP anyway, forget about the Libertarian Party, and vote for Donald. And I didn't do it for this time. And we had a whole bunch of libertarians that, helped elect Biden, it looks like. And look what's going on in Georgia now. Shane Hazel got 2.5% of the vote for the Perdue race for Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And had he not done that, Perdue would have been a senator right now, and the Republicans would have had 51 people instead of 50. So I wrote something saying, well, every libertarian in Georgia has a moral duty to vote for Perdue now, and this created a bit of a ruckus. Donald Trump is better on foreign policy. It's no new wars have been created under Donald. Donald made peace in the Middle East. Donald didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. Obama did, but Obama did nothing. Every once in a while, Donald tries to get out of Afghanistan, and all the generals say, no, you can't do that. And he made the mistake of hiring advisors who were, militarists. But, Bernie was pretty good on foreign policy too. And I think one time Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders had some sort of, I forget what it was, but it was for peace. And who was that gal from
Cortez?
No, the woman from Hawaii who ran for
Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard, right?
Tulsi Gabbard. She was excellent on foreign policy. She was almost like Ron Paul. Bring the troops home, for God's sakes.
I believe Ron Paul endorsed her, right?
I'm sorry?
I believe Ron Paul endorsed her.
Well, she was horrible on economics.
She was, yes.
But boy, oh boy, was she good on foreign policy. And Donald was saying, we've been in Afghanistan almost 20 years. What's with that?
Yeah.
Whereas, the Democrats under Biden aren't going to pull out of Afghanistan. Not that Donald did, but at least Donald had those instincts. So I had no compunction about supporting Donald versus Hillary, who was a real warmonger.
What shocked me, or I don't know if I should say it shocked me, but just seeing how selfish the leftist people were in this election, like looking at the foreign policy, there's such a big difference. Like, we just have to look at Biden's past. Like, people are like, oh, well, he's saying this. We're like, no, just look at his past. He was a liar. He ran for president before. He lied about everything. Just look at his actions. Actions speak louder than words. He was always very bad on foreign policy. He was very bad on criminal justice. Trump is objectively better on both of those things. If Biden goes and bombs a bunch of people in the Middle East, way more than Trump would have done, that blood is on all of their hands. The people who advocated for Biden and voted for him but are against this stuff, like, I could not in good conscience ever do that. Just like, I know there's other issues they're thinking about, like abortion issues, but like bombing a bunch of people in the Middle East or being able to have your abortion, that's something you should really think about other people on instead of thinking about yourself.
Well, the joke is, how do you tell a politician is lying? He's moving his lips.
Yeah.
Now, there are exceptions. Obviously, Rand Paul. There are good politicians. A good politician is not a contradiction in terms, but they're pretty much libertarian politicians. But on abortion, libertarians are very divided. Ron Paul is pro-life. Murray Rothbard is pro-choice. You can't get further apart than pro-life and pro-choice. And yet you can't get two better libertarians than Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard, and yet they diverge. Now, happily, he said modestly, I've come up with the proper solution for this one, and it's called evictionism. You see, there are really two issues: can you evict the fetus, and can you kill the fetus? And the pro-life people say, no, you can't evict and you can't kill. And the pro-choice people say, yes, you can evict and you can kill. And the evictionism theory is sort of a compromise. It says you can evict, but you can't kill. And the idea here is, I believe that life starts with the fertilized egg, because the sperm alone and the egg alone will not eventuate into a person, but the fertilized egg will. So you got a person. But this person is a trespasser. Think of rape. Woman's walking down the street. She gets grabbed. She gets impregnated. She gets raped. And now there's a trespasser growing inside of her. Well, who owns? The way to analyze libertarian problems is who owns the property. Well, the woman owns the property. She was there first. The Lockean homesteading theory. Yep. She owns her body. And this person who's growing inside of her and if she was a nice person, she would leave the baby alone for 9 months and then maybe give it up for adoption. But she doesn't have to. That would be over and above the call of duty. That would be a positive right. So she has a right to evict, but not to kill, because the baby is innocent. It's the father who is the rapist. He's the bad guy. So that would be my attempted solution for the abortion quandary that plagues not only libertarians, but plagues society in general.
As a point, just real quickly, do you know what Hans Hoppe's point of view on abortion is? Because I've never been able to really pinpoint that.
I don't think he's written about it, and I've mentioned it to him, and he hasn't criticized it. So I imagine he agrees, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, actually, going on the election point of view, I mean, I think we all can assume that most of the candidates are very big government. You could say that they're fringing on the socialists or something like that. Do you think? What do you think is the best book for anti-Marxist, anti-socialist sentiments? If you found a socialist and you wanted to attempt to convert them, what would you recommend to them?
Well, Mises wrote a book called Socialism.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. I don't know if anything better. One of the things I do at Loyola is I run a thing called the Human Action Seminar. Why Human Action? Because that was the first book we covered. Well, the book we're now doing is Mises' Socialism. Mm. The next book we're going to do is Hans Hoppe's The God That Failed.
Oh, Democracy, yes.
Democracy, The God That Failed. Yeah. So we have this book club that I run for mainly for Loyola students, but there are a few professors and professors from Tulane. Sometimes we get a Tulane student. Tulane is right next door. And then we get people from the community. There's a Lutheran minister, a lawyer, doctor, people like that. So I would say socialism is a very good book to give a socialist.
Yeah, I probably agree with you after I've read it a couple times. It is a very good book to give a socialist. So speaking on the economics point of view, just as a criticism of socialism, I've always heard from many Austrians that the best book, or one of the best books, is Bombavark's book on Karl Marx and the Close of the System. What's your general thoughts on that book? Because as I understand, it's a very complicated book, but it's
Bombavark. Well, the main Austrians are Menger, Bombavark, Mises, Hayek. Those would be the creators of it. Bombavark is like a steamroller. He is just magnificent. He is very meticulous. You have to stay awake when you read Bombavark. You just can't flip pages. You have to think about it and read it very slowly. His stuff on interest rates is just nothing short of magnificent. I'm a big fan of Bombavark.
Speaking on tough books, I guess I'd like to ask you: have you read and do you think, how complicated do you think Hayek's book, The Pure Theory of Capital, is? As I understand, it's an extremely complicated book.
Well, I've tried it. I've tried it several times, and this is true confession. I never got through it. I couldn't understand it. I mean, I gave it the old college try 2 or 3 times, and I start thinking, that if I'm not drunk, and I don't usually drink alcohol, and I really try hard, and I read something 3 times and I can't get it, then I start wondering, well, is it me or is it the book? And maybe it's the book. Maybe there's a problem with the book. Now, Hayek is really, really good on business cycles, but he was not really a quintessential Austrian because he didn't believe in praxeology. He didn't follow Mises for the synthetic a priori. The idea that there are certain statements that are empirical, like it's raining outside. And then there are others that are tautologies, like bachelors or unmarried men, or 2 + 2 is 4. And then there's things that are called synthetic a priori. See, the thing about an empirical statement is that it tells you about the world, but it's not necessarily true. Not necessarily true that it's dark or it's raining. Sometimes it's light and it's not raining. And bachelors or unmarried men doesn't tell you about reality. It just tells you about how we're using words. this is what really stopped me from being an Austrian for about a year and a half, 2 years. Plus, I was a student of Gary Becker, and I had incentive to not be an Austrian. Murray used to say the best time to get converted to Austrian was 1 week before you get your PhD. Because if you get converted too soon, unless you're at a place like George Mason or Texas Tech, where there are Austrians, you're going to have trouble. You want to stay in the closet, and it's a problem because a lot of the mainstream people think that Austrianism is a cult. Gary Becker, my dissertation advisor, thought it was a cult. James Buchanan, I once invited him to Loyola, and I promised myself I wouldn't ambush him because I don't agree with him on everything. Mm-hmm. And I would just sort of be his good host. But he started saying that Austrianism is a cult. So I lost it, and I gave him a 10-minute diatribe, and I was ready to, get it on, but he just sort of ignored that. But they see it as a cult, and I saw it as a cult initially. But how can you have a synthetic a priori, something that's absolutely necessarily true, the denial of which is a self-contradiction, not merely false, and yet tells you something about the world? Well, there are a lot of examples. I see, Benjamin, you have a nice red shirt, and you paid $25 for it. Well, how much did you value that shirt at the time you bought it? More than 25, otherwise you wouldn't have bought it. 2501 or 26, not 25, because why would you bestir yourself if you only valued it at the same amount as the money? There would be no profit in it for you. And how much did the guy,
all the time?
Right, we're profit seekers. And how much did the guy who sold that shirt to you value it at? Probably $2 because he had millions of them around and he was dying to get rid of them. And he made a profit off of you of 23, and you valued it at 30, so you made a profit of 5. What I just said is necessarily true. It can't be denied. You deny that, you don't understand the English language. Ex ante, now maybe ex post, he regretted it or you regretted it, but ex ante, when you made that purchase, you gained from that purchase and so did he. And every voluntary trade is mutually beneficial. Well, there's a synthetic a priori statement that is, to deny that is a self-contradiction, and yet it tells us about the world, right? I once got in a debate with, what's his name? Brian Kaplan. At Mason, who wrote a thing, Why I'm Not an Austrian Economist. And I was trying to give him a very simple example. I mean, there were other more complicated examples, minimum wage, rent control, free trade, stuff like that. But I just gave him this sort of barter or purchase of a sweater. And he wasn't having any of it, but I couldn't understand his objection. So Hayek was not a praxeologist. And to me, the essence of praxeology, the essence of Austrianism is praxeology.
Yeah.
But Hayek did other good work.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. I wanted to go into possibly ethics. What do you think about Hans Hoppe's argument on argumentation ethics?
Oh, I'm a big fan of Hans on that one. I regard that as so creative, so brilliant. The non-aggression principle and private property rights are sort of the essence of libertarianism. Mm-hmm. And then what libertarianism consists of mainly is the implications. Well, what are our views on unions? What are our views on prostitution? What are our views on heroin? What are our views on, it all stems from the non-aggression principle and private property rights. Mm. But now the question is, what justifies that? And there are various theories, utilitarianism or religion. God says that we should have the non-aggression principle, or natural rights, natural law, which Murray Rothbard had before Hans came up with this. Mm. And this is a great credit to Murray because, Murray, when Hans came over to the US, he was like 28 or so. And Murray was, 45 or 50. Mm. And Hans came up with a theory that was better than Murray's theory. And usually, you get the leader of the pack, Murray, and some young snot-nosed kid, Hans, comes along and has a better theory. The leader, you try that with Ayn Rand, she'll kick you out. Murray didn't do that. Murray said Hans was right. And namely, what Hans was doing is justifying the non-aggression principle and private property rights. And what he was saying is, look, the only way we're going to get to the truth about anything is by arguing, by discussing. If I'm having an argument with somebody and I shoot him, well, I didn't win the argument. I just shot him. The only way to win the argument is to argue. And then Hans says, well, what do you need for arguing? And guess what? Well, you need the non-aggression principle and private property rights. Mm-hmm. So I think that is just exquisitely beautiful, and I regard Hans Hoppe as sort of a Johann Sebastian Bach,
Yeah.
who he's sort of like a steamroller and inevitable, and you just can't resist Bach if you're into music the way I am, and you just can't resist Hans. I mean this is a compliment that that Hans is brilliant, and that Argument from Argument or Argumentation Ethics is exquisite.
I actually have a question about this because I started looking into argumentation ethics and I found a critique of argumentation ethics on YouTube. And there's this libertarian YouTuber, and he was going through this speech by Hoppe. And Hoppe says, you can't make a truth claim without argumentation. I believe that's what he said, or something to that extent. And then the guy responded by saying, I can make a truth claim without argumentation. Like I can say, if someone rings the doorbell, I know there's someone at the front door. And to that, I said, that's not a truth claim, because like I looked up the definition of truth claim, and it's supposed to be something that's not a hypothesis that's not proven by previous experience. And so if someone rings the doorbell and you recognize that means someone's at the door, it's because of previous experience. So is my response to that correct?
Well, I think you can make truth claims, like you're wearing a red sweater, I'm wearing a white sweater, Bleu is wearing a gray sweater, Mencius has got a great top hat and he's a little green around the gills. These are all truth statements. They're empirical truth statements, but I don't think Hans is saying that you can't make a truth statement without an argument. But I think instead what Hans is saying is, if you want to conclude that you're really wearing a red shirt, you have to allow other people to say, well, no, it's really green, and now we have a little test. But suppose you say, look, it's a red shirt, and anyone who disagrees with me, I'm going to shoot him. Well, that's not science. That's not the way to develop truth. The way to develop truth is to allow, John Stuart Mill in his On Liberty, a very good essay, in my opinion, is saying that if you only know your own side, you don't really know your own side, because your own side is defined in tandem with the other side. So certainly as an empirical method for science, if, look, in some countries under the Soviet Union, if you didn't agree with Lysenko, that was it for you. Well, how are you going to get science developed? How are you going to get to the truth if you don't allow argument, if you don't allow other people to decide things? See, this is one of the reasons that I don't believe in global warming. Why don't I believe in global warming? Well, look, I'm an economist and I'm a libertarian theoretician. What do I know from global warming? I know nothing from global warming. But I notice that one side is threatening to put the other side in jail for disagreeing, and one side is trying to get the other side losing their jobs. And I deduce from this, well, if they were really had truth on their side, why would they have to do that? Why couldn't they just rely on evidence and argumentation?
There'd be no necessity for aggression.
Right. Now, look, in physics, they argue about whether matter is like a wave or a particle, but nobody's threatening to put anyone in jail. Now, I don't know if it's a wave or a particle. I'm not into physics, but whatever they decide, look, the Earth looks pretty flat to me. But, all the astronomers say it's round. So, and nobody's threatening to put anyone else in jail, although they did years ago, and the Earth floating around the sun, or the sun floating around the Earth, and what happened to Copernicus. So I think that this is a mischaracterization of what Hans is saying. Hans is not saying you can only get truth by arguing. That would be a very simplistic and fallacious way of interpreting Hans. I think a much better way would be, look, if you want to have progress in intellectual affairs, you got to allow people to disagree. That's the problem with the cancel culture. The cancel culture, they don't want to argue about socialism. They just want to kick you out and maybe put you in jail. The BLM and the Antifa people, they're not arguing. So I think this is a mischaracterization of what Hans is saying. I'm a big fan of Hans. Look, I disagree with Hans on other things. I disagree with him on immigration and a few other things. But I think he's really a great economist and a great libertarian theorist.
Speaking on that, is immigration your biggest disagreement with Hans, or do you have any other big ones, or is that just the big one?
Well, that's the only one I can think of now. There might be one or two others. I'm not sure about abortion, whether he agrees with me or not. I think he does, but he's not written on that. On immigration, Hans favors, what do you call it, regulation. He doesn't favor open borders. And by the way, there's another area where libertarians disagree with each other on immigration. And my view is, suppose somebody comes from Mars or from Africa or from, I don't know, China, and he comes in a helicopter and he goes to Wyoming in the middle of the Rockies and he lands there and he starts homesteading. Did he commit a crime? That is a libertarian crime. I mean, obviously he committed a crime, but we're not talking about U.S. crimes. We're talking about libertarian crime. Did he commit a libertarian crime? And the answer is no, because that's virgin territory. Nobody's ever been there. Nobody's been within 100 miles of this particular spot in Alaska or in Wyoming or wherever it is, or Utah. There are places in Utah nobody's ever been. Well, if we can establish that one person has come to the United States against the immigration laws, well, then the immigration laws are unjust. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you know, a lot of people who favor open borders, as I do, think that all immigrants are great guys. You know, let them all come in. They're great guys. They'll have less murder, and then they'll have more jobs and yak, yak, yak. Well, some immigrants are okay, but some of them are pretty nasty people. You know, the immigrants from New York, they go to Florida, and guess what? They make Florida more like New York. Namely, they're trying to escape the socialism of New York, and then they vote for socialism in Florida. And they leave California, and they go to Texas, and they make Texas bluer. They leave Mexico, or they leave Venezuela or whatever, and they come to the U.S., and they make the U.S. more like that. And then, you know, do you really want, suppose 3 trillion people come from Mars? Do you really want 3 trillion people in the country? So I'm sort of out of step, because most open immigration people think that all immigrants are great guys. I'm an open immigration person, but I don't think every immigrant is a great guy. Some of them are pretty nasty people. So how do we have our cake and eat it? How do we adhere to, you see, what Hans says is, look, that guy who came to the middle of Wyoming, he is really violating property rights because that property is claimed by the U.S. government. And I say, what, Hans, you're an anarchist. You can't do that. You can't say that the middle of Wyoming is owned by the U.S. government. The U.S. government never homesteaded that. He says, well, they own it in I don't know, in behalf of the citizenry. Nonsense. The U.S. government doesn't own squat in behalf of the citizenry. Certainly not from an anarchist point of view or any point of view, because they didn't homestead it. Even a Lockean, forget about an anarchist, wouldn't see that. So how do we get, how do we have our cake and eat it? How do we adhere to, how do we not jettison libertarian principle just because we don't want to be inundated by immigrants? And the answer is private property rights.
Market borders.
I'm sorry?
Market borders.
No, not market borders, private property. We privatize every square inch of the country. Not only the land, but also the water. The Mississippi River should be privatized. Every square inch should be privatized. Now, some of it is submarginal, but it wouldn't be submarginal if people were worried about being inundated. So then, if the Martian comes to the middle of Wyoming, he's a trespasser. So that's how I think we solve the problem of being inundated without jettisoning libertarian principle. I promised you guys 1 hour, and we've got only a minute or two left. So maybe one last question or last.
Bean, if you'd like to ask a question. I mean, I have a question, but I'd like Bean to ask a question since he hasn't talked that much.
I'm not sure if I have a question.
An objection?
Well, you talked a little bit about abortion, your evictionist position. They told me I'm not allowed to debate you on it because I'm a departurist. And we don't have enough time for it now, but I am working on like my own critique of evictionism. I don't want to go over it right now because I'm not ready at all. But yeah, when I'm done with that, maybe I'll email it to you.
is this guy Parr, P-A-R-R, who is a departurist.
Yeah, Sean
and I
Parr.
have an article criticizing him on that. So read that, and look, we can do this interview in another month or two, and then I'll give you a homework assignment to raise that issue.
All right. Well, I think we have one more question from Bleu, and then we can end it.
Well, as you may know, Walter, the Libertarian Party is the fastest growing party in America as of 2020, and with more young libertarians just getting into the political philosophy and economic ideology of this, what is one or two books that you would recommend for people who are just getting into this ideology?
Introduction to Libertarianism, the best two books are The Ethics of Liberty and For a New Liberty, I would say. And then there are many, many other, Why I'm a Libertarian, and there must be another 10 or 15 books that are very good. But those would be the two that I would recommend first. Let me part with a commercial message. I'm a professor at Loyola University. I'm always looking around for young people like you guys to come and study with me. And it wouldn't be just me, because the whole economics department are Austro-Libertarian. John Levendis, Leo Kasjan, Bill Barnett are all Austro-Libertarians. And we've got several other libertarian professors. We've got a lot of libertarian students. Now, it's true Loyola isn't as prestigious as Harvard or MIT. But, if you want to have a good career in academia, my view is you don't really need a good prestigious undergraduate place. The key is a prestigious PhD place. So I'm putting in a pitch. You guys look about the age of my students. So if you're thinking of transferring anywhere, or you're in high school and you want to come to a place where you will be appreciated, come to Loyola, New Orleans.
And I'm confident we'll definitely consider it. Thank you very much for joining us, Walter. It was great having you on. It was great learning a little bit more about libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism. And thank you, everyone who's watching, for watching the live.
It sure has been a pleasure, Walter.
Take care.
Thank you
It's
so
been
much.
a pleasure on my side, too.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye now.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning into the stream. It has been quite a successful stream. I hope you all could get some insight
Bleu, you're muted.
from Walter, from Dr. Block, and I hope this could be an enjoyable stream for you, especially from a world-renowned economist. So thank you all for tuning in. This has been Blue Politics from Politified.